The sky over Chicago was beginning to tint with the orange hues of dusk when Victoria parked the adapted van on the side of a dirt road near the Rocky Mountains. Beside her, Emily, her 23-year-old stepdaughter, watched the landscape with growing apprehension. The silence between them was thick, laden with a tension that had been building for months. "We need to stop here for a moment," said Victoria, her voice artificially soft. "There's a place I want to show you." Emily tucked her long brown hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she had maintained since childhood. Her honey-colored eyes, always expressive, couldn't hide her suspicion. Something about her stepmother's demeanor was different that afternoon. "It's getting dark, Victoria." "I don't think stopping here is a good idea," Emily replied, her hands instinctively gripping the arms of her wheelchair. Victoria ignored the comment and got out of the car, heading to the back to retrieve the access ramp. With mechanical movements, she positioned the ramp and helped Emily down. The humid forest air enveloped them, carrying the scent of damp earth and dense vegetation. "It's just a few minutes," Victoria insisted, pushing the wheelchair along an uneven path that led into the woods. Emily felt her heart race as they moved further away from the road. The wheels of her chair struggled more and more to advance over the rough terrain. "Victoria, please, let's go back. This place isn't accessible, can't you see?" Emily tried to argue, her voice beginning to tremble. It was then that Victoria abruptly stopped in a small clearing. Without a word, she took a few steps back, leaving Emily alone in the center of the space. The sun was almost set, and the shadows of the trees began to stretch menacingly. "You know, Emily," Victoria began, her voice taking on a cold tone that Emily had never heard before, "your father never should have married me if he wasn't willing to give me full control of his assets. Now that he's traveling, I have the perfect opportunity to resolve this situation." Emily felt her blood run cold. "What are you talking about? You are the only obstacle between me and your father's fortune. With you indisposed, I can finally take control of everything," revealed Victoria, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "You've gone mad. My father will notice. People will look for me," protested Emily, trying in vain to move her chair on the uneven ground. "Oh dear," Victoria laughed humorlessly. "I've thought of everything. A very convincing farewell letter is already in your room. You know how everyone says you never truly got over the accident that took away your mobility. It will be a sad story, but perfectly plausible." Before Emily could respond, Victoria had already turned her back and started walking toward the van. "Enjoy the company of the forest animals," were her last words before disappearing among the trees. Emily tried to scream, but her voice seemed to vanish into the vastness of the forest. Panic began to take over her body as darkness quickly approached. The trees around her seemed to form a natural prison, and the distant sound of breaking branches made her realize her complete vulnerability. Alone in the clearing, Emily fought back the tears that began to form in her eyes. The air was getting colder, and she had nothing but the light clothes she was wearing. Her thoughts raced wildly, trying to find a way out of this desperate situation. It was then that a movement in the shadows caught her attention. Two bright yellow eyes appeared among the trees, fixed on her. A black wolf, larger than any dog she had ever seen, emerged silently from the darkness. Emily felt her heart stop for a moment, certain that her fate was sealed. However, something about the animal's behavior was different. He didn't show aggression, only a cautious curiosity. Maintaining a respectful distance, the wolf began to circle the clearing, its movements fluid and controlled. It was as if it were standing guard, establishing an invisible perimeter of protection around her. As the night fully settled in, Emily realized the wolf had no intention of leaving her. Its presence, paradoxically, began to bring a strange comfort. The glowing yellow eyes remained alert to any movement in the forest, like a silent guardian in the growing darkness. Michael drove, his Range Rover along the winding road that cut through the Rocky Mountains, his thoughts as hazy as the approaching night. At 35, he had achieved more than many could in a lifetime. A successful tech company, an impressive mansion, and abundant financial resources. Yet since his sister Sophia had passed away after a prolonged illness, nothing seemed to hold real meaning. The car clock read 7:43 p.m. when his eyes caught something unusual by the roadside. Fresh tire marks on the shoulder, and more importantly, strange grooves leading into the woods. His years of trail experience made him recognize that this wasn't normal. How odd, he murmured to himself, slowing down. Something deep within him, perhaps the same intuition that had guided him in so many important decisions in his life, made him stop the car. Grabbing a powerful flashlight from the glove compartment, Michael stepped out of the vehicle. The air was colder than usual for a spring night in Chicago. Wearing only a dress shirt and slacks, he felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't just from the cold. The marks on the ground told a disturbing story. Something or someone had been dragged into the forest. Michael began to follow the trail, his flashlight illuminating the path as he ventured deeper into the dense woods. "Is anyone there?" he called out, his voice echoing among the trees. It was then that a low sound, almost a growl, caught his attention. Turning quickly, Michael pointed the flashlight in the direction of the noise. His eyes widened as he came face to face with a black wolf of impressive size. The animal stood a few meters away, its yellow eyes reflecting the light of the flashlight. Defying every survival instinct, Michael did not retreat. There was something in the wolf's behavior that did not suggest a threat. The animal seemed to want him to follow. "This is insane," Michael muttered to himself, but his feet were already carrying him in the direction the wolf indicated. After a few tense minutes of walking, they reached a clearing. The moonlight, now shining in the sky, revealed a scene Michael would never forget. A young woman in a wheelchair, shivering from the cold but with a look of determination in her eyes. "My God!" he exclaimed, running toward her. "Are you okay? What happened?" Emily, who had spent the last hours alternating between states of fear and hope, felt tears of relief stream down her face. I was abandoned here," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. Michael took off his blazer and placed it over her shoulders, noticing how she trembled. The wolf remained at a respectful distance, watching the scene with an almost solemn posture. "I'll get you out of here," Michael assured her, his voice conveying a confidence that made Emily feel protected for the first time that terrible night. "What's your name?" "Emily," she replied, her honey-colored eyes meeting his. "And that wolf? He stayed with me all night, protecting me." Michael looked back at the animal, which was now sitting in the shadows of the clearing. There was an almost supernatural intelligence in its gaze, as if it understood perfectly what was happening. "I've never seen anything like it," Michael remarked as he assessed the best way to get Emily out of there. The wheelchair would be impossible to maneuver on the rough terrain. "I'll have to carry you, okay? We'll come back for the wheelchair later." Emily nodded, allowing Michael to pick her up in his arms. The contact with his strong arms made her feel strangely safe, despite the surreal situation. As they walked back to the car, Emily briefly told Michael about Victoria and her cruel plan. Michael felt his blood boil with every detail of the story, but he kept his voice calm and reassuring. "You'll be okay," he assured her. "My house isn't far from here, and I have resources to help you. We can contact the authorities from there." The wolf followed them to the edge of the road, maintaining a constant distance. When Michael opened the car door to place Emily in the passenger seat, the animal sat down, as if standing guard. "Thank you," Emily whispered to the wolf with the strange certainty that it could understand. The yellow eyes blinked slowly in her direction, in a gesture that seemed almost like a farewell. As Michael stored the wheelchair in the trunk of his car, Emily couldn't take her eyes off the magnificent animal that had been her protector during those hours of darkness. There was something mystical about its presence, as if it were more than just a wild animal. There was something special about her, an inner strength that shone through even in the smallest gestures. The way her honey-colored eyes sparkled when she spoke, the quiet determination in her gaze, everything about her intrigued him deeply. "Tomorrow I'll bring a trusted doctor for a full evaluation," Michael informed her. "And I've also arranged for a specialized physical therapist who can start working with you as soon as you're ready." "Why are you doing all this for me?" Emily asked, her voice heavy with emotion. Michael stood up, walking to the window. The rain had intensified, and the gardens glistened under the streetlights. "Maybe I needed a purpose too," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. something to bring this house back to life. The morning arrived with a gentleness that contrasted with the turbulence of recent events. Emily woke to the first rays of sunlight streaming through the silk curtains, taking a moment to orient herself in the luxurious room. The reality of the previous night's events hit her like a wave, but surprisingly, she felt stronger than she thought possible. A soft knock at the door preceded Claire's entrance, carrying a tray of a carefully prepared breakfast. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" the housekeeper asked, placing the tray on a table near the bed. "Better than I expected," replied Emily, adjusting herself in bed with Claire's help. "Where's Michael?" "The boss has been in a meeting with the lawyers since early this morning," Claire explained, serving a cup of coffee. "He asked me to let you know that the doctor will be here in an hour." As she sipped her coffee, Emily was startled by a news report on the television that Claire had turned on. The anchor's voice filled the room. In a surprising development, Victoria Anderson, wife of businessman Paul Anderson, is being sought by the police following allegations of attempted financial manipulation and aggravated abandonment. Sources indicate that she allegedly left her stepdaughter, Emily Anderson, in a dangerous situation in a remote area. Emily felt her stomach churn. Seeing her story exposed in the media was surreal, but what disturbed her the most was the photo of her father next to Victoria, taken during their last business trip abroad. "My dad, does he know yet?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. As if answering her question, Michael entered the room, his expression serious but comforting. "We managed to get in touch with him a short while ago. He's returning immediately from Singapore." Emily nodded, trying to process all the information. Michael approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The investigators found documents on Victoria's computer," he continued, his voice gentle but firm. "She had been planning this for months. There were suspicious transfers, forged documents. She intended to take control of everything while your father was away." "How could she?" Emily murmured, more to herself than to the others. "After all these years." Michael covered her hand with his, a simple gesture but one filled with comfort. "Some people are masters at hiding their true nature. Don't blame yourself for not realizing it sooner." The doctor arrived promptly, interrupting the conversation. Dr. Frederick, a middle-aged man with a paternal demeanor, conducted a thorough examination of Emily, paying special attention to signs of stress and exposure to the cold. "Considering the circumstances, you're surprisingly well," he concluded, jotting down some notes. "But I want you to start psychological follow-up as soon as possible. Traumas like this need to be properly processed." After the doctor left, Michael introduced Emily to the physical therapist he had hired. Dr. Beatrice was a young and dynamic professional, specializing in rehabilitating patients with reduced mobility. "I noticed you have excellent posture," Beatrice commented while conducting an initial assessment. "How long have you been using the wheelchair?" "Since I was 16, Emily replied. "A car accident." "Emily was a swimmer," Michael gently interjected, surprising her. Noticing her questioning look, he explained, "I researched you last night. I found some old articles about your competitions." Emily felt a soft blush color her cheeks. "Yes, I was preparing for the state trials when it happened. And there's no reason you can't swim again," Beatrice said enthusiastically. The wolf remained still, watching as the car drove away. Its bright eyes reflected the light of the taillights until the vehicle disappeared around the bend in the road, taking with it the young woman it had protected during that extraordinary night. Michael's mansion stood imposingly in the Beverly Hills neighborhood, its soft lights illuminating the extensive front garden. Emily watched everything with a mix of admiration and apprehension as the car drove up the main driveway. The last few hours felt like a hazy dream, as if reality had blended with elements of a dark fairy tale. "Welcome to my home," Michael said, parking near the main entrance. "I know you must be exhausted, but we need to take care of you first." The housekeeper, Claire, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and grey hair, was already waiting at the door, alerted by a phone call from Michael during the drive. His face showed concern upon seeing Emily's condition. "My God, I'll prepare a hot bath and get clean clothes ready immediately," said Claire, already moving efficiently through the marble hallway. Michael carried Emily gently to a suite on the ground floor, specially prepared by Claire. The room was spacious and welcoming, with a large window overlooking the backyard garden. A nurse, called by Michael on the way, was already waiting to perform an initial assessment. "I need to make some calls," said Michael, after ensuring Emily was in good hands. "Don't worry, you're safe here." As the nurse and Claire tended to her, Emily finally allowed the tears held back for so long to flow freely. They were not just tears of fear or sadness, but also of relief and gratitude. The memory of the black wolf, its watchful eyes and protective presence, now seemed like a distant dream. After a comforting bath and dressed in clean, warm clothes, Emily felt stronger and ready to talk to Michael, who returned to the room carrying a cup of hot tea. "I managed to reach some contacts," he began, sitting in an armchair near the bed, where Emily rested. "The police are already looking for Victoria, and my lawyers are handling the necessary paperwork." "Thank you," Emily whispered, her fingers wrapping around the warm cup. "For everything. I still can't believe everything that happened." Michael watched her carefully. Even after all she had been through, there was a remarkable strength in her gaze. "You showed impressive courage," he said. "Many would have completely panicked in that situation." "The wolf," Emily began hesitantly. "Do you think it was real?" "Sometimes I think I might have imagined it all." "It was real," Michael assured, a small smile forming on his lips. "As real as we are here, right? Now, I've never seen anything like it in all my hikes through the Rocky Mountains." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Emily watched the droplets trickle down the window, creating hypnotic patterns on the glass. "You must be wondering why I have an adapted suite on the ground floor," Michael commented after a few moments. "My sister Sophia," his voice faltered slightly, "she also needed special accommodations. I transformed the house for her." Emily noticed the pain in his voice. "She's not here anymore?" Michael shook his head. "An illness took her 2 years ago. Since then, I've kept everything as she left it, but I admit the house felt too empty." "I'm sorry," Emily said, genuinely moved. The pain in Michael's eyes was palpable, and she felt an instant connection with him, as if they shared something beyond words. "Emily," Michael began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I want you to know you can stay here as long as you need. I have the resources and means to ensure your safety and well-being." "But you barely know me," she protested, though her heart warmed at the offer. "Sometimes life puts us in situations that feel predestined," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Finding you in that forest, maybe it wasn't just a coincidence." Emily felt her face flush slightly under Michael's intense gaze. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe, and at the same time vulnerable in a completely new way. Claire entered the room carrying a tray with a light dinner, interrupting the moment. "You need to eat, dear," she said, with maternal affection. "Tomorrow will be a new day and you'll need your strength." As Emily ate, Michael watched her discreetly. "The pool here is heated, and we can adapt it to your needs." Michael observed the interaction with a subtle smile. Seeing Emily getting excited about the possibility of resuming an activity she loved warmed his heart in a way he hadn't expected. In the afternoon, after the session with Beatrice, Emily was in her wheelchair in the garden, enjoying the gentle sun, when Michael joined her. He carried a folder with documents. "We found the letter Victoria had left in your room," he said, hesitantly. "Do you want to see it?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Yes, I need to see it." The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. Victoria had crafted a convincing narrative of a depressed young woman who had decided to disappear. The coldness of the planning was chilling. "She really thought she could pull it off," Emily commented, her voice filled with disbelief. "Greedy people often underestimate the strength of those they consider weaker," Michael replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "But you proved to be much stronger than she imagined." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sound of the garden fountain. Emily discreetly observed Michael, noticing how the evening light softened his usually serious features. "You know," she began, her voice low but firm, "when I was in that forest, before the wolf appeared, I thought everything was lost. But something Inside me refused to give up. Michael turned his gaze to her, sensing a new strength in her expression. "Sometimes we need to be completely lost to find our true strength," he remarked, his voice filled with understanding. "Like what happened to you after losing your sister?" Emily asked softly, noticing how his eyes softened at the mention of Sophia. "Exactly," he replied, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Sophia taught me that our greatest strength often comes from our most vulnerable moments." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. In the distance, a lone howl echoed from the mountains, causing Emily to shiver slightly. The memory of the black wolf remained vivid in her mind, like a silent guardian of her survival. 2 weeks had passed since that night in the forest. The mansion, which once seemed so imposing and unfamiliar to Emily, was starting to feel like home. The daily physical therapy sessions with Beatrice were yielding significant progress, and the pool, now fully adapted, had become her favorite refuge. That particular morning, Emily glided through the water with a grace that left Michael sitting by the poolside, breathless. It was as if in the water all barriers disappeared, and she returned to being that young athlete full of dreams. "Your technique is still impressive," he commented as Emily emerged near the edge. "You can tell swimming is in your blood." Emily smiled, feeling the water droplets run down her face. "In the water, sometimes I completely forget about the wheelchair. It's like nothing has changed." Michael watched her with an intensity that made her heart race. Over the past few weeks, something had shifted between them. What began as a relationship of protector and protected was evolving into something deeper, more complex. "Your father arrives tomorrow," Michael mentioned, helping her out of the pool with a gentleness that contrasted with his physical strength. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Emily admitted, as he helped her settle into her chair. "I haven't seen him since before all of this happened, and there's so much to explain." The mention of Emily's father brought up news that Michael had been hesitant to share. He wheeled her chair to a covered area near the pool, where Claire had already prepared a light breakfast. "Emily," he began, his serious tone catching her attention, "I received some information about Victoria this morning. She was seen trying to leave the country with fake documents." Emily felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the pool water on her skin. Did they catch her?" "Not yet," Michael replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "But it's only a matter of time. All exits from the country are being monitored." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sound of the breeze rustling the leaves. Emily realized, surprisingly, that she no longer felt fear when thinking about Victoria. Instead, there was a mix of pity and indignation. "You know, what's strangest?" she finally said. "Part of me is almost grateful for what she did." Michael looked at her, intrigued. "How so?" "If she hadn't abandoned me in that forest, I would never have discovered my own strength. I would never have met you." Emily blushed slightly at her last admission. Michael moved closer, kneeling beside her chair to meet her eye level. "Emily, He was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Claire, who was carrying a cordless phone. "Mr. Michael, it's Detective Mendel. He says it's urgent." Michael picked up the phone, never taking his eyes off Emily. The conversation was brief, but his expression shifted as he listened to what the detective was saying. "They found Victoria's hideout," he announced after hanging up, "at an inn in the countryside of Colorado, but she managed to escape minutes before the police arrived. She left behind a suitcase with documents." "What kind of documents?" Emily asked, feeling her heart race. "Apparently she's been planning this longer than we thought. There are records of overseas accounts, forged documents. She's been stealing from her father for years." Emily closed her eyes, feeling a wave of sadness for her father. How would he react when he discovered the extent of Victoria's betrayal? "Michael," she called softly, opening her eyes to meet his concerned gaze. "Do you think I'll ever understand why she did all this?" He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Some people are consumed by greed, Emily. There's no rational explanation. That justifies cruelty." At that moment, something shifted in the air between them. The closeness, the touch of their hands, the look they shared. It all seemed charged with deeper meaning. Sometimes, Michael continued, his voice softer, the worst situations lead us to the best places. Or to the best people. Emily felt her heart race. The way Michael looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world, made her stomach flutter. "Michael, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of her phone. It was a message from her father, confirming his arrival time for the next day. The moment was broken, but something had irrevocably changed between them. Michael stood up, keeping one of her hands in his. "Let's get ready for your father's arrival," he said, his voice still heavy with emotion. "But this conversation, it's not over." Emily nodded, feeling warmth spread through her chest. As Michael led her back inside the house, she couldn't help but think about how drastically her life had changed in the past few weeks. The fear and darkness of that night in the forest had given way to something bright and full of possibilities. On the horizon, dark clouds were approaching, foretelling a storm. Emily couldn't help but think of the symbolism. Just as that terrible night had brought light into her life, perhaps the approaching clouds also held their own disguised blessings. The black car glided smoothly into the mansion's driveway exactly at 9 in the morning. Emily, who was on the porch with Michael, felt her heart race as she saw her father, Paul Anderson, emerge from the vehicle. Even from a distance, she could notice how he seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "My daughter," Paul's voice trembled as he saw her. In seconds, he had run to the porch and knelt before Emily's chair, wrapping her in a tight hug. "My girl, forgive me, forgive me." Emily felt tears stream down her face as she hugged her father. Michael discreetly stepped away, giving privacy to the reunion between father and daughter. "Dad, it wasn't your fault," Emily whispered, feeling the sobs that shook Paul's body. "You couldn't have known." Paul gently stepped back, holding his daughter's face in his hands. His eyes, identical to hers, were brimming with tears. "I should have noticed, should have seen the signs. Victoria, how could she do this to you?" Claire appeared quietly, guiding father and daughter to a private room where they could talk more comfortably. Michael remained on the balcony, watching the light rain begin to fall, giving them the space they needed for that difficult conversation. "The investigators showed me everything," Paul began after calming down a bit. "The fake documents, the secret accounts. She had been embezzling money for years, planning everything meticulously." Emily watched her father with a mix of love and concern. "How are you handling all of this?" Paul ran his hand through his graying hair, a gesture Emily had recognized since childhood as a sign of his distress. It's like waking up from a nightmare only to find that reality is even worse. But none of it, absolutely none of it, matters compared to what she tried to do to you. "Dad," Emily called softly, holding his hands, "we need to talk about that night." And so Emily told him everything. The tense journey to the forest, Victoria's cruel words, the hours of loneliness and fear, the mysterious appearance of the black wolf, and finally, the rescue by Michael. "A wolf?" Paul asked, incredulous. "To the Rocky Mountains?" "I know it sounds impossible," Emily smiled faintly, "but he was there protecting me. And then Michael appeared." The mention of Michael's name made Paul turn toward the balcony, where he could see the silhouette of the man who had saved his daughter. "I can never thank him enough." "He's been amazing, Dad," Emily commented, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "Not just for the rescue, but for everything he's done since then." Paul watched his daughter closely, noticing something in her voice when she spoke of Michael. "Emily, is there something you want to tell me?" Before she could answer, Michael returned to the room bringing urgent news. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just got an important call. Victoria was spotted in a small town in Paraguay." Paul stood up abruptly. "I'll activate my contacts immediately. She can't get away like this." "We're already on it," Michael assured. "My connections in the tech industry are tracking all suspicious financial movements in the region." Emily watched the interaction between her father and Michael, noticing how they seemed to work in natural harmony, united by the common goal of seeking justice. "Emily," Paul turned to his daughter, "I want you to know that no matter what happens with Victoria, you'll never have to worry about your safety again. I'll make sure that—" "Dad," Emily gently interrupted him, "I'm not afraid anymore. That night in the forest, it changed something in me. For the first time since the accident, I felt truly strong. Paul looked at her with a mix of pride and admiration. You have always been strong, my daughter. You just needed to rediscover that. Michael, who was watching the scene with contained emotion, added, Your daughter is extraordinary, Mr. Paul. Over the past few weeks, she has shown impressive strength and determination. Paul's eyes moved between Michael and Emily, noticing the glances they exchanged. There was something more than gratitude and friendship there, something quietly blossoming. Michael, Paul called, his voice taking on a more formal tone. I would like to speak with you privately, if possible. Emily felt her heart race. What did her father have to say to Michael? Before she could protest, Claire appeared again, suggesting that she take the opportunity to rest a bit after the intense emotions of the reunion. As she was led to her room, Emily couldn't help but think about how her life had changed. Victoria's betrayal, though painful, had paved the way for new beginnings. Fear had given way to courage, loneliness to warmth, and in the midst of it all, her heart was discovering feelings she never imagined she could experience. Michael's office was an elegant space, with walls lined in dark wood and a privileged view of the mansion's gardens. Paul Anderson gazed through the large windows as Michael served 2 cups of coffee. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken words. So, Paul began, accepting the offered cup, you are Michael Tavares, the famous tech entrepreneur. I admit it took me a while to make the connection. Michael nodded, sitting in his armchair. Yes, I founded TechAid 10 years ago. We started by developing assistive technologies, inspired by my sister Sophia's condition. Sophia, Paul repeated thoughtfully. Emily told me about her. I'm truly sorry for your loss. A flicker of pain crossed Michael's eyes. She was extraordinary. Even facing severe physical limitations, she never lost the will to live, to make a difference. Paul took a sip of his coffee, studying the man in front of him. You know, Michael, it's not every day that a successful businessman finds a young woman abandoned in the forest and decides not only to rescue her, but to offer all kinds of support. Mr. Paul, Please, Paul gently interrupted him. Let me finish. I'm an observant man, Michael. I see how you look at my daughter and how she looks at you. Michael felt his heart race, but maintained his composure. Sir, I need to be honest. Your instincts are correct. I've developed deep feelings for Emily, but I would never act without your knowledge and approval. Paul stood up, walking to the window. The rain had intensified, creating a silver veil over the gardens. Do you know what my biggest mistake with Victoria was? I didn't trust my instincts. There were signs, small details I ignored. But with yours, my instincts tell me something completely different. Turning to face Michael, Paul continued, I see in your eyes the same light I saw in Sophia's when Emily talks about her. It's the look of someone who truly understands what it means to love and care for a person with special needs. Emily is so much more than her physical limitations, Michael replied with conviction. She's the strongest and most determined person I've ever met. Yes, she is, Paul smiled with pride. And after everything that's happened, she deserves someone who sees her exactly as she is. At that moment, they were interrupted by urgent knocks at the door. Claire hurried in, followed by Emily in her wheelchair. Sorry to interrupt, Emily said, her face showing concern, but I just received a very strange message on my phone. Michael and Paul immediately approached. Emily showed her phone, where a message from an unknown number read, The Black Wolf won't always be there to protect you. Victoria, Paul murmured, his face paling. She's taunting us. I traced the number, Emily continued, surprising everyone. I used that program you taught me, Michael. The signal is coming from a city near Asunción in Paraguay. Michael couldn't help but smile, impressed by Emily's cleverness. You learn fast. I'll call my contacts at the border immediately, Paul declared, grabbing his phone. As Paul made his calls, Michael knelt beside Emily's wheelchair. Are you okay? That message must have scared you. Strangely, no, Emily replied, her eyes meeting his. I'm not afraid of her anymore. And besides, she hesitated for a moment. I have you now. Michael's heart raced at those words. Unconcerned. With Paul's presence on the phone, he took Emily's hand in his. You always will, he promised. his voice soft but intense. Paul, who had finished his call, watched the scene with a mix of emotion and approval. The Paraguayan authorities are on alert. It's only a matter of time before they find her. "Dad," Emily called without letting go of Michael's hand. "What were you talking about earlier?" Paul exchanged a knowing glance with Michael before responding, "About the future, my dear, and I must say for the first time in a long while, I am truly optimistic about it." At that moment, a familiar sound echoed in the distance, a lone howl coming from the direction of the Rocky Mountains. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was as if the black wolf, her mysterious protector, was reminding her of her inner strength. "You know," she commented, looking out the window toward the distant mountains, "sometimes I think that wolf wasn't just an animal. It was as if he represented something greater, a protective force that appears when we need it most." Michael gently squeezed her hand, perfectly understanding what she meant. Paul, watching their interaction, felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. His daughter was not only safe, but also finding her own path to happiness. The rain began to ease. Outside, and a ray of sunlight managed to break through the clouds, illuminating the office with a golden light. It was as if nature itself was signaling that after the storm, brighter days would always come. The afternoon was settling over Chicago as Emily finished her physical therapy session in the pool. Over the past few weeks, her progress had been remarkable, and Beatrice didn't hold back on praising her dedication. From the other side of the pool area, Michael watched her with admiration, trying and failing to hide how enchanted he was by every small victory of hers. "You're getting stronger every day," he remarked, helping her settle into her wheelchair. "Beatrice said your physical condition is almost at the same level as when you used to compete." Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on her still damp skin. "It's like I've rediscovered a part of me that was dormant. You know that feeling? Like anything is possible?" Michael knelt beside her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I know exactly what you're talking about. It's how I feel every time I see you smile." The moment was interrupted by Claire, who hurried over with a tablet in hand. "Miss Emily, I think you need to see this." On the screen, a live broadcast showed footage of an ongoing police operation in Paraguay. The headline was shocking. "International Embezzlement Scheme Uncovered. Brazilian Victoria Anderson among those involved." "My God," Emily whispered as she read the details of the report. She wasn't alone in all of this. Michael quickly grabbed his phone, making a few calls. Meanwhile, Paul entered the pool area, his face a mix of shock and sadness. "I just spoke with the investigators," Paul said, sitting heavily on one of the lounge chairs. "Victoria was part of an organization specialized in corporate fraud. They specifically targeted successful businessmen, using marriages as a way to gain access." Emily felt a tightness in her chest as she saw the pain in her father's eyes. "Dad, you couldn't have seen this coming. The worst part," Paul continued, his voice choked, "is that you weren't the first person she tried to push away. There were other cases in other countries. She had just never been caught before." Michael, who had finished his calls, joined them with new information. "The Paraguayan police are surrounding the location where she's hiding. It's an isolated farm near the border with Bolivia." "How could she?" Emily murmured, more to herself than to the others. "Living with us for so many years, planning all of this." Michael stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Some people are masters at creating illusions, Emily, but now everything is coming to light." At that moment, Emily's phone buzzed with a new message. It was again from an unknown number, but this time the content was different. "You think you've won, don't you? But I'm not done yet. I still have one more trick up my sleeve." Paul immediately took the phone to forward it to the police, but Emily seemed oddly calm. "You know what's interesting?" she remarked, surprising everyone. "Before, a message like this would have terrified me. Now I can only feel pity for her." Michael watched her with pride. "You've grown a lot these past few weeks." "Yes," Emily agreed, a small smile forming on her lips. "I think sometimes we need to face our greatest fears to discover our true strength." Claire, who had remained silent, suddenly drew everyone's attention to the TV in the outdoor area. The live broadcast showed intense activity at the Paraguayan farm. The reporter, visibly agitated, announced that the police had launched the operation to capture the suspects. "I'll call my contacts at the border," Paul said, standing up quickly. "We need to make sure she doesn't escape again." As Paul walked away to make his calls, Michael noticed that Emily seemed deep in thought. "What's on your mind?" "About how life takes unexpected turns," she replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Victoria wanted to destroy me in that forest, but she ended up setting me free. If it weren't for that night, I might never have rediscovered my strength. I would never have met you." Michael knelt beside her again, taking her hands in his. "Emily, I need to tell you something. Something I've been feeling for weeks, but I was waiting for the right moment." Before he could continue, Paul came, running back, his face lit up with relief and triumph. "They got her. Victoria was caught trying to escape through the back of the farm. It's over. It's finally over." Emily felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Relief, justice, closure, but above all, a sense that a chapter of her life was ending, making way for something new and far more promising. "Michael," she called, softly turning to him. "What were you going to tell me?" He smiled, that smile that made her heart melt. "How about we talk about it over dinner? Just the two of us?" Paul, observing the scene, couldn't help but smile. "I think this is my cue to go handle some important phone calls," he said, discreetly winking at his daughter before leaving. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. In the distance, as if celebrating that moment of victory and new beginnings, a familiar howl echoed from the mountains. Emily smiled, knowing that the sound which had once comforted her on her darkest night was now a reminder of her transformative journey. The garden of the mansion had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Small decorative lights hung between the trees, creating a lit path to an elegantly set table near the fountain. Emily, wearing a midnight blue dress that accentuated her honey-colored eyes, couldn't contain her smile as she saw the care with which Michael had prepared every detail. "This is magical," she whispered, as Michael guided her chair along the illuminated path. "I wanted tonight to be special," he replied, his voice soft as velvet. "We have so much to celebrate." The news of Victoria's capture had spread quickly through the media. The investigations revealed an international fraud network, and her arrest marked the end of years of meticulously planned crimes. But that night, neither Emily nor Michael wanted to talk about the past. The present was far more interesting. "You know," Michael began after dinner was served, "since Sophia left, I had lost the ability to truly connect with anyone. I buried myself in work, in technology, trying to fill a void that seemed endless." Emily watched him attentively, noticing how the candlelight danced on his face, softening his usually serious features. "And then," he continued, "on a dark night, in the forest following mysterious tracks on the ground, and an even more mysterious wolf, I found you." "It's funny how fate works," Emily commented, a gentle smile on her lips. "That night, which should have been my end, turned out to be my new beginning." Michael reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Emily, over the past few weeks, I've been trying to find the right words to express how I feel. How do you explain that you brought color back to a world that had turned gray?" "Michael," she whispered, her heart racing. "Let me finish," he said gently. "When Sophia was in her final days, she made me promise that I wouldn't let pain stop me from living. Life is too precious to be wasted on fear, she used to say. But I only truly understood the meaning of those words when I met you." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. Michael stood up from his chair, moving closer to her. "You are the bravest person I've ever known," he continued. "Your strength isn't just in how you faced that terrible night, but in how you approach each day with determination and grace. And I've completely fallen for you." Emily's heart felt like it was about to leap out of her chest. "I've fallen for you too, Michael. From the very first moment, there was something special. Something that went beyond the rescue, beyond gratitude." Michael knelt beside her chair, his eyes locked on hers. "I have a dream, Emily. A dream that started with Sophia and now, with you, has taken on a new meaning. I want to expand TechAid's work, create a rehabilitation and research center that can help people with different needs, and I want you to be a part of it, not just as an inspiration, but as a partner. A rehabilitation center? Emily asked, her eyes shining with interest. Yes, I imagine a place that combines cutting-edge technology with compassionate care. A space where people can rediscover their strength, just as you rediscovered yours. And I want it to be called Project Dawn, because like the sunrise, it represents a new beginning. Emily felt her heart expand with those words. It's a beautiful dream, Michael. And there's more, he continued, his voice trembling slightly, with emotion. Emily, I know it might seem rushed, but when something is right, we just know. Would you do me the honor of sharing not just this dream, but all the others, of building a life together? At that moment, as if orchestrated by fate itself, a familiar howl echoed from the mountains. Emily smiled through her tears, remembering the black wolf that had been her first guardian on that fateful night. Yes, she replied, her voice filled with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Michael kissed her then, a soft and deep kiss that carried all the promises of the future. Above them, the stars shone with a special intensity, as if blessing that moment. In the distance, at the edge of the forest that now seemed much less frightening, a shadow moved. The black wolf watched silently, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. Its mission was complete. The one it had protected was not only safe, but had found her true path. Look, Emily whispered, pointing toward the forest. Do you see? Michael followed her gaze just in time to see the wolf disappear among the trees. He always appears at the most important moments, he remarked, smiling. Like a guardian angel, Emily added, leaning back against Michael as they watched the moon rise in the starry sky. The gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers from the garden, mingled with promises of love and hope. The night, which had once been a stage for darkness and fear, now witnessed the birth of something beautiful and profound, a love that, like the dawn itself, brought with it the promise of a new beginning. A year had passed since that fateful night in the forest. The Dawn Rehabilitation Center, located on a vast property in the Rocky Mountains, opened its doors to its first group of patients. The modern building, with its elegant lines and cutting-edge technology, harmoniously contrasted with the lush nature surrounding it. Emily, dressed in a sleek executive suit, guided her motorized wheelchair through the center's hallways, checking the final details before the inauguration ceremony. Every space had been meticulously planned to be not only functional but also welcoming and inspiring. Everything is perfect, Michael remarked, approaching her with a proud smile. You thought of every detail. We thought of it, she corrected, returning the smile. This place is the realization of a shared dream. The Dawn Center was not just an ordinary rehabilitation clinic. It combined the most advanced assistive technology developed by Michael's TechAid with a humanized approach to treatment. But its true distinction lay in something deeper, the philosophy that every limitation could be transformed into strength. The first patients arrive in an hour, Emily commented, checking her tablet. I still can't believe we made it. Michael knelt beside her chair, gently adjusting the ring on her finger. You made all of this possible. Your story inspires everyone who walks through those doors. The center's main lobby displayed a striking piece of art, a mural in shades of blue and silver depicting a black wolf under a starry sky. Below it, a golden plaque bore the inscription, "In the darkest nights we find our inner light." Paul Anderson, who had just arrived for the inauguration, stopped in front of the mural, moved. It's amazing how something so terrible could turn into so much good, he remarked, embracing his daughter. The news about Victoria had faded from the headlines. After her arrest and conviction, she had become just a distant memory. A page turned in the history of that family. The focus now was on the future, on the lives that could be transformed. Emily, Claire called, hurrying over. The first patient arrived early. She's a teenager and seems quite nervous. Emily exchanged a meaningful glance with Michael before heading to the reception area. There she found a 15-year-old girl in a wheelchair, accompanied by her parents. The fear in her eyes was something Emily knew all too well. "Welcome to Dawn," Emily greeted her with a warm smile. "I'm Emily, and I'll be guiding you through your journey here." You too," the girl stammered, pointing at Emily's wheelchair. "Yes," Emily replied softly. "And I'll tell you a story about how I discovered that our greatest limitations can become our greatest strength." As Emily led the family to a welcoming room, Michael watched with admiration. In moments like that, he could clearly see how the universe had conspired to bring them together. The tragedy that could have destroyed Emily had instead revealed her true essence. The opening day unfolded like a dream. Dozens of people, patients, family members, healthcare professionals and officials moved through the spaces of the Dawn Rehabilitation Center. Every environment had been designed to convey hope and possibility, from the state-of-the-art physical therapy rooms to the communal areas with views of nature. By late afternoon, as the last guests were leaving, Emily and Michael met in the therapeutic garden, a special space where patients could reconnect with nature during their recovery process. The sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know," Emily began, her voice soft, "this morning when I was arriving, I thought I saw something at the edge of the forest." Michael smiled, knowing exactly what she was talking about. "The wolf?" "Yes," she confirmed. For a moment, its yellow eyes gleamed among the trees. It was as if it was approving all of this. "Maybe it was," Michael replied, embracing her. From behind. Some mysteries in life don't need to be explained, just accepted and honored. A gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of freshly planted flowers. In the distance, like a final blessing, a lone howl echoed. "From the mountains!" Emily and Michael smiled, recognizing that sound which had become so significant in their lives. "Ready for this next adventure?" Michael asked, softly kissing her forehead. "With you?" "Always," Emily answered, her eyes shining with love and determination. The Dawn Rehabilitation Center was more than a dream come true. It was a symbol of how love, courage, and determination could turn the greatest adversities into opportunities for growth. And there, under the sky that was beginning to fill with stars, Emily and Michael knew they had found not only each other, but also their true purpose. Night fell gently over the Rocky Mountains, and with it came the promise of new dawns, new stories of overcoming and love. The Black Wolf, the silent guardian of that extraordinary journey, had fulfilled its mission, to guide two destined souls through the darkness until they found their own light. And so, in the heart of the forest that had once been a setting of fear and despair, now blossomed a story of love, hope, and transformation. An eternal reminder that even in the darkest nights, dawn always arrives, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning.